How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Original Simon & Schuster edition published 1936. Copyright 1936 by Dale Carnegie. A Shortcut to Distinction by Lowell Thomas. On a cold winter night in January, 2,500 men and women thronged into the grand ballroom of the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City. Every available seat was filled by 7:30. At 8 o'clock, the eager crowd was still pouring in. The spacious balcony was soon jammed. Presently, even standing space was at a premium, and hundreds of people, tired after navigating a day in business, stood up for an hour and a half that night to witness. What? A fashion show? A 6-day bicycle race, or a personal appearance of Clark Gable? No. These people had been lured there by a newspaper ad. 2 evenings previously, they had picked up a copy of the New York Sun and found a full-page announcement staring them in the face. Increase your income. Learn to speak effectively. Prepare for leadership. Old stuff? Yes. But believe it or not, in the most sophisticated town on earth, during a depression with 20% of the population on relief, 2,500 people left their homes and hustled to the Pennsylvania Hotel in response to that ad. The ad appeared, remember this, not in a tabloid sheet, but in the most conservative evening paper in town, the New York Sun. And the people who responded were of the upper economic strata, executives, employers, and professional men with incomes ranging from $10,000 to $50,000 a year. These men and women had come to hear the opening gun of an ultra-modern, ultra-practical course in effective speaking and influencing men in business, a course given by the Dale Carnegie Institute of Effective Speaking and Human Relations. Why were they there, these 2,500 businessmen and women? Because of a sudden hunger for more education due to the Depression? Apparently not, for this same course had been playing to packed houses in New York City every season for the past 24 years. During that time, more than 15,000 business and professional men had been trained by Dale Carnegie. Even large skeptical conservative organizations such as the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company, McGraw-Hill Publishing Company, Brooklyn Union Gas Company, Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, American Institute of Electrical Engineers, and the New York Telephone Company have had this training conducted in their own offices for the benefit of their members and executives. The fact that these men, 10 or 20 years after leaving grade school, high school, or college, come and take this training is a glaring commentary on the shocking deficiencies of our educational system. What do adults really want to study? That is an important question, and in order to answer it, the University of Chicago, the American Association for Adult Education, and the United YMCA schools made a survey that cost $25,000 and covered 2 years. That survey revealed that the prime interest of adults is health. It also revealed that their second interest is in developing skill in human relationships. They want to learn the technique of getting along with and influencing other people. They don't want to become public speakers, and they don't want to listen to a lot of high-sounding talk about psychology. They want suggestions that they can use immediately in business, in social contacts, and in the home. So that was what the adults wanted to study, was it? All right, said the people making the survey. Fine. If that is what they want, we'll give it to them. Looking around for a textbook, they discovered that no working manual had ever been written to help people solve their daily problems in human relationships. Here was a fine kettle of fish. For hundreds of years, learned volumes had been written on the Greek and Latin and higher mathematics, topics about which the average adult doesn't give 2 hoots. But on the one subject on which he has a thirst for knowledge, A veritable passion for guidance and help? Nothing. This explains the presence of 2,500 eager adults crowding into the grand ballroom of the Hotel Pennsylvania in response to a newspaper advertisement. Here, apparently, at last was the thing for which they had long been seeking. Back in high school and college, they had pored over books, believing that knowledge alone was the open sesame to financial and professional rewards. But a few years in the rough and tumble of business and professional life had brought sharp disillusionment. They had seen some of the most important business success won by men who possessed, in addition to their knowledge, the ability to talk well, win people to their way of thinking, and sell themselves and their ideas. They soon discovered that if one aspired to wear the captain's cap and navigate the ship of business, personality and ability to talk are more important than a knowledge of Latin verbs or a sheepskin from Harvard. The advertisement in the New York Sun promised that the meeting in the Hotel Pennsylvania would be highly entertaining. It was. 18 men who had taken the course were marshaled in front of the loudspeaker, and each of 15 of them was given precisely 75 seconds to tell his story. Only 75 seconds of talk. Then bang went the gavel, and the chairman shouted, "Time! Next speaker!" The affair moved with the speed of a herd of buffalo thundering across the plains. Spectators stood for an hour and a half to watch the performance. The speakers were a cross-section of American business life. A chain store executive, a baker, the president of a trade association, 2 bankers, a truck salesman, a chemical salesman, an insurance man, the secretary of a brick manufacturers association, an accountant, a dentist, an architect, a whiskey salesman, a Christian Science practitioner, a druggist who had come from Indianapolis to New York to take the course, a lawyer who had come from Havana in order to prepare himself to give one important 3-minute speech. The first speaker bore the Gaelic name of Patrick J. O'Hare. Born in Ireland, he attended school for only 4 years, drifted to America, worked as a mechanic, then as a chauffeur. At 40, his family was growing up. He needed more money, so he tried to sell automobile trucks, suffering from an inferiority complex that, as he put it, was eating his heart out. He had to walk up and down in front of an office half a dozen times before he could summon up enough courage to open the door. He was so discouraged as a salesman that he was thinking of going back to work with his hands in a machine shop, when one day he received a letter inviting him to an organization meeting of the Dale Carnegie course in effective speaking. He didn't want to attend. He feared that he would have to associate with a lot of college men, that he would be out of place. His despairing wife insisted that he go, saying, "It may do you some good, Pat. God knows you need it." He went down to the place where the meeting was to be held and stood on the sidewalk for 5 minutes before he could generate enough self-confidence to enter the room. The first few times he tried to speak, he was dizzy with fear. As the weeks drifted by, he lost all fear of audience and soon found that he loved to talk. The bigger the crowd, the better. And he also lost his fear of individuals. He lost his fear of his own customers. His income mounted and skyrocketed. Today, he is one of the star salesmen in New York City. That night at the Pennsylvania Hotel, Patrick O'Hare stood in front of 2,500 people and told a gay, rollicking story of his achievements. Wave after wave of laughter swept over the audience. Few professional speakers could have equaled his performance. The next speaker, Godfrey Mayer, was a gray-headed banker, father of 11 children. The first time he attempted to speak in class, he was literally struck dumb. His mind refused to function. His story is a vivid illustration of how leadership gravitates to the man who can talk. He works on Wall Street, and for 25 years he has been living in Clifton, New Jersey. During that time, he had taken no active part in community affairs and knew perhaps 500 people. Shortly after he had enrolled in the Carnegie course, he received his tax bill and was infuriated at what he considered unjust charges. Ordinarily, he would have sat at home and fumed, or taken it out in grousing to his neighbors, but instead, he put on his hat that night, walked into town meeting, and blew off his steam in public. As a result of that talk of indignation, the citizens of Clifton, New Jersey urged him to run for the town council. So for weeks, he went from one meeting to another, denouncing waste and municipal extravagance. There were 96 candidates in the field. When the ballots were counted, lo, Godfrey Mayer's name led all the rest. Almost overnight, he became a public figure among the 40,000 people in his community. As a result of his talks, he made 80 times more friends in 6 weeks than he had been able to do previously in 25 years. And his salary as councilman meant that he got a return of 1,000% a year on his investment. The third speaker, the head of a large national association of food manufacturers, told how he had been unable to stand up and express his ideas at meetings of a board of directors. As a result of learning to think on his feet, 2 astonishing things happened. He was soon made president of his association, and, in that capacity, he was obliged to address meetings all over the United States. Excerpts from his talks were put on the Associated Press wires and printed in newspapers and trade magazines throughout the country. In 2 weeks after learning to speak, he received more free publicity for his company and its products than he had been able to get previously by $250,000 spent in direct advertising. This speaker admitted that he had formerly hesitated to telephone some of the more important executives in Lower Manhattan and invite them to lunch with him. But as a result of the prestige he had acquired by his talks, these same men now telephoned him and invited him to lunch and apologized to him for encroaching on his time. The ability to speak is a shortcut to distinction. It puts a man in the limelight, raises him head and shoulders above the crowd, and the man who can speak acceptably is usually given credit for an ability out of all proportion to what he really possesses. A movement for adult education is sweeping over the nation today, and the most spectacular force in that movement is Dale Carnegie, a man who has listened to and criticized more talks by adults than any other man in captivity. According to a recent cartoon by Believe It or Not Ripley, he has criticized 150,000 speeches. If that grand total doesn't impress you, remember that it means one talk for almost every day that has passed since Columbus discovered America. Or, to put it in other words, if all the men who have spoken before him had used only 3 minutes and had appeared before him in succession, it would have taken a solid year, listening day and night, to hear them all. Dale Carnegie's own career, filled with sharp contrast, is a striking example of what a man can accomplish when he is obsessed with the original idea and afire with enthusiasm. Born on a Missouri farm 10 miles from a railway, he never saw a streetcar until he was 12 years old. Yet at 46 he was familiar with the far-flung corners of the earth, everywhere from Hong Kong to Hammerfest, and at one time he approached closer to the North Pole than Admiral Byrd's headquarters in Little America were to the South Pole. This Missouri lad who had once picked strawberries and cut cockleburrs for 5 cents an hour is now paid $1 a minute for training the executives of large corporations in the art of self-expression. This erstwhile cowboy who once punched cattle and branded calves and rode fences out in the western South Dakota ladder went to London and put on shows under the patronage of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. This chap, who was a total failure the first half dozen times that he tried to speak in public, later became my personal manager. Much of my success has been due to training under Dale Carnegie. Young Carnegie had to struggle for an education, for hard luck was always battering away at the old farm in northwest Missouri with a flying tackle and a body slam. Year after year, the 102 River rose and drowned the corn and swept away the hay. Season after season, the fat hogs sickened and died from cholera. The bottom fell out of the market for cattle and mules, and the bank threatened to foreclose the mortgage. Sick with discouragement, the family sold out and bought another farm near the State Teachers College at Warrensburg, Missouri. Board and room could be had in town for $1 a day, but young Carnegie couldn't afford it, so he stayed on the farm and commuted on horseback 3 miles to college each day. At home, he milked the cows, cut the wood, fed the hogs, and studied his Latin verbs by the light of a coal oil lamp until his eyes blurred and he began to nod. Even when he got to bed at midnight, he set the alarm for 3 o'clock. His father bred pedigreed Duroc Jersey hogs, and there was danger during the bitter cold nights of the young pigs freezing to death. So they were put in a basket covered with a gunny sack and set behind the kitchen stove. True to their nature, the pigs demanded a hot meal at 3 a.m. So when the alarm went off, Dale Carnegie crawled out of the blankets, took the basket of pigs out to their mother, waited for them to nurse, and then brought them back into the warmth of the kitchen stove. There were 600 students in State Teachers College, and Dale Carnegie was one of the isolated half-dozen who couldn't afford to board in town. He was ashamed of the poverty that made it necessary for him to ride back to the farm and milk the cows every night. He was ashamed of his coat, which was too tight, and his trousers, which were too short. Rapidly developing an inferiority complex, he looked about for some shortcut to distinction. He soon saw that there were certain groups in college that enjoyed influence and prestige. The football and baseball players, and the chaps who won the debating and public speaking contest. Realizing that he had no flair for athletics, he decided to win one of the speaking contests. He spent 3 months preparing his talks. He practiced as he sat in the saddle galloping to college and back. He practiced his speeches as he milked the cows, and then he mounted a bale of hay in the barn, and with great gusto and gestures harangued the frightened pigeons about the necessity of halting Japanese immigration. But in spite of all his earnestness and preparation, he met with defeat after defeat. He was 18 at the time, sensitive and proud. He became so discouraged, so depressed that he even thought of suicide. And then suddenly he began to win. Not one contest, but every speaking contest in college. Other students pleaded with him to train them, and they won also. Graduating from college, he started selling correspondence courses to the ranchers amongst the sand hills of western Nebraska and eastern Wyoming. In spite of all his boundless energy and enthusiasm, he couldn't make the grade. He became so discouraged that he went to his hotel room in Alliance, Nebraska, in the middle of the day, and threw himself across the bed and wept with despair. He longed to go back to college. He longed to retreat from the harsh battle of life, but he couldn't. So he resolved to go to Omaha and get another job. He didn't have the money for a railroad ticket, so he traveled on a freight train, feeding and watering 2 carloads of wild horses in return for his passage. Landing in South Omaha, he got a job selling bacon and soap and lard for Armour and Company. His territory was up among the Badlands and the cow and Indian country of western South Dakota. He covered his territory by freight train, and on stagecoach, and on horseback, and slept in pioneer hotels where the only partition between the rooms was a sheet of muslin. He studied books on salesmanship, rode bucking broncos, played poker with squaw men, and learned how to collect money. When an inland storekeeper couldn't pay cash for the bacon and hams he had ordered, Dale Carnegie would take a dozen pairs of shoes off his shelf, sell the shoes to the railroad men, and forward the receipts to Armour and Company. He would often ride a freight train 100 miles a day. When the train stopped to unload freight, he would dash uptown, see 3 or 4 merchants, get his orders, and when the whistle blew, he would dash down the street again, lickety-split, and swing onto the train while it was moving. Within 2 years, he had taken an unproductive territory that stood in the 25th place and boosted it to the first place amongst all the 29 car routes leading out of South Omaha. Armour and Company offered to promote him, saying, "You have achieved what seemed impossible, but he refused the promotion and resigned. Resigned, went to New York, studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and toured the country playing the role of Dr. Hartley in Polly of the Circus. He would never be a Booth or a Barrymore. He had the good sense to recognize that. So back he went to sales work again, dispensing automobile trucks for the Packard Motor Car Company. He knew nothing about machinery and cared nothing about it. Dreadfully unhappy, he had to scourge himself to his task each day. He longed to have time to study, to write the books he had dreamed about writing back in college. So he resigned. He was going to spend his days writing stories and novels and support himself by teaching in a night school. Teaching what? As he looked back and evaluated his college work, he saw that training in public speaking had done more to give him confidence, courage, poise, and the ability to meet and deal with people in business than had all the rest of his college courses put together. So he urged the YMCA schools in New York to give him a chance to conduct courses in public speaking for businessmen. What? Make orators out of businessmen? Absurd! They knew. They had tried such courses, and they had always failed. When they refused to pay him a salary of $2 a night, he agreed to teach on a commission basis and take a percentage of the net profits, if there were any profits to take. And inside of 3 years, they were paying him $30 a night on that basis instead of $2. The course grew. Other Ys heard of it. Then other cities. Dale Carnegie soon became a glorified circuit rider covering New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and later London and Paris. All the textbooks were too academic and impractical for the businessmen who had flocked to his courses. Nothing daunted, he sat down and wrote one entitled Public Speaking and Influencing Men in Business. It is now the official text of all the YMCAs, as well as the American Bankers Association and the National Credit Men's Association. Today, far more adults come to Dale Carnegie for training in public speaking each season than go to all the extension courses in public speaking conducted by all the 22 colleges and universities located in New York City. Dale Carnegie claims that any man can talk when he gets mad. He says that if you hit the most ignorant man in town on the jaw and knock him down, he will get on his feet and talk with an eloquence, heat, and emphasis that would rival William Jennings Bryan in his palmiest days. He claims that almost any man can speak acceptably in public if he has self-confidence and an idea that is boiling and stewing within him. The way to develop self-confidence, he says, is to do the thing you fear to do and get a record of successful experiences behind you. So he forces each man to talk at every session of the course. The audience is sympathetic. They are all in the same boat. And by constant practice, they develop a courage, confidence, and enthusiasm that carry over into their private speaking. Dale Carnegie will tell you that he has made a living all these years, not by teaching public speaking. That has been incidental. He claims his main job has been to help men conquer their fears and develop courage. He started out at first to conduct merely a course in public speaking, but the students who came were businessmen. Many of them hadn't seen the inside of a classroom in 30 years. Most of them were paying their tuition on the installment plan. They wanted results, and they wanted them quick. Results that they could use the next day in business interviews and in speaking before groups. So he was forced to be swift and practical. Consequently, he has developed a system of training that is unique, a striking combination of public speaking, salesmanship, human relations, and applied psychology. A slave to no hard and fast rules, he has developed a course that is as real as the measles and twice as much fun. When the classes terminate, the men form clubs of their own and continue to meet fortnightly for years afterwards. One group of 19 men in Philadelphia has been meeting twice a month during the winter season for 17 years. Men frequently motor 50 or 100 miles to attend these classes. One student used a commute each week from Chicago to New York. Professor William James of Harvard used to say that the average man develops only 10% of his latent mental ability. Dale Carnegie, by helping businessmen and women to develop their latent possibilities, has created one of the most significant movements in adult education.